Hey, Ryan coming at you with a video, and this is going to be a first in a series of videos where I'm going to be talking about a bunch of movies from like the 30s, mainly the 30s, that I don't really ever see videos for. Not necessarily because people have never heard of them or don't own them or something like that, but just because a lot of people don't really talk about a lot of 30s movies on here. I know a lot of that probably is because of, they don't typically get big views or anything like that. So my goal with this series is I don't really care about getting a crap ton of reviews for talking about some of these films. I've told myself this year that I'm going to be talking about things that I love to talk about. And I know I have a core group of friends and loyal followers who will gladly hear me talk about anything, which is awesome. But I just want to give some light to some movies that I just have fallen in love with. And I think the 30s is a very severely underrated time period to talk about with film. Not necessarily underrated like in a lot of film communities, but I mean underrated, I feel like, on this platform. I don't really see a lot of YouTubers talk about films from the 30s. There's definitely some that will talk about different highlights of, really popular movies from the 30s, but there's a lot that I have fallen in love with recently in the past year that I never heard of before. I never heard anybody talk about it. So those are some of the ones that I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to be doing a whole nother video probably eventually talking about like pre-code and that whole scenario of movies. Actually, I'll go ahead and say it. So the Hays Code came out to regulate the movies that were being made in terms of making sure that they had good, strong moral characters and all that kind of stuff. You guys have heard the stories. And there was a few years in the 30s when it wasn't being enforced. So you get a lot of gangster movies and stuff like that that come out of it that have terrible characters, that have, sexual content, violence, and just things you didn't see in movies at the time. And they started making things a lot more realistic. So eventually they started enforcing it, and the pre-code era came to an end, and things were a little bit more regulated. In some ways, they were very regulated. And so 30s movies really shows a lot of that. Now, this one came out in the later 80s, or the later 30s, but the reason why I want to talk about this first is because this is the one that kind of led me to all the other ones. Actually, no, this is one of the ones that came out in the in this 1939. It was kind of the first one that I watched in this pack of 30s films, which started with an actor who I always have loved, Edward G. Robinson. And TCM last year had, he was the star of the month. So there was tons of Edward G. Robinson movies on. He was either star of the month or it was during Summer of the Stars or something like that. He had a day or a month, I can't remember. And so I DVR'd a ton that I had never heard of. This is one of them. What I was actually getting ready to talk about, I was actually thinking I was getting ready to talk about another movie, but I realized I had the wrong one in my hand. But this still kind of falls along in that. So this is from 1939. It is Blackmail, starring Edward G. Robinson, Ruth Hussey, Gene Lockhart, and directed by H.C. Potter. So this movie, Edward G. Robinson plays a ex-con. He's actually a fugitive, but he was framed, and so he, down the road, ended up getting married, all that kind of stuff, actually having a new life and new identity, and he had a really good business for himself. He basically was a guy who put out oil fires. So if, there was a drill going on and some explosives happened, or some, flames came up and everything like that, and it actually was going to harm the oil well, his company would go and set a demolition to stop the, flames from going up. I don't really know a lot about oil drilling and all that stuff, so I don't know exactly what the term's called, but that's what he did. And he has a really successful business. He has a reputation about it in regards to that. And he's just really glad to be living the good life and not getting busted by the cops or anything like that. because he was framed to begin with. So he wasn't necessarily a criminal. So basically, things are going great, and a former acquaintance of his, shows up, and he's played by Gene Lockhart, who I haven't really seen a ton of his other stuff, but apparently this is like a rare turn where he's like a villain. And basically, he shows up and blackmails Edward G. Robinson for money, or, he needs some money, give him a job and all this kind of stuff. And basically it's kind of like not really said, but it's like, you either give me this money or I'm gonna rat you out. And Edward G. Robinson's like, oh my God, like, I'm not gonna ruin my whole life for this guy. And turns out he's a really crappy worker. And so they end up having some disagreements, and the guy sets him up, and Edward G. Robinson gets busted and gets thrown in jail. And he gets thrown into a chain gang. And this is where I'm going to get into spoilers, but all these are discussion videos. And in my opinion, sometimes talking about movies, to me, I could hear about an old movie like this and get spoiled and still enjoy it because I really just want people to see it. But if you don't want to get spoiled, stop now and come back after you watch Blackmail. So he goes into the chain gang, and turns out that the guy is actually in charge of his company now, and he's just doing things his own way, and he has information that could actually give Edward G. Robinson, make him innocent, and to where he comes out, to where that he was set up for that previous crime. And he basically stays with this chain gang. The guy does not keep his word, and he escapes. And the chain gang scenes in this film are pretty brutal. I'll talk about another one in the future. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang with Paul Muni. But there was a time period last year, I was really into movies that were set during like the chain gang era. And so he ends up escaping and foils the guy, and he ends up saving an oil well in the middle of the whole thing. And, he's a hero. And it's a nice, like, bow wrapped ending, but I'm pretty sure if it was made in the pre-code era that it wouldn't have been that perfect. It wouldn't have had a happy ending, but this one did. But I love this film because, like, I didn't really ever hear it talked about. I love movies that have to do with, like, oil drilling, like There Will Be Blood, and movies about greed and stuff like that. But this, Edward G. Robinson's character is a good guy. He is a swell guy. Or should I say, like a lot of 30s films say, he's on the level. He's a good guy. You could trust him. But I really, really just love this movie because of Edward G. Robinson. Like, it's just such a great actor. Like, whenever he's on screen, you're glued to it. And it's just the progression of the story. It has like this cynical grittiness to it, but then has a little bit of hope as well because of the lightness of some of the characters that worked for him that are getting involved. And then even scenes like the escape, they're really suspenseful, but it has like an adventure kind of element to it. And it's just a great, great movie. And there's a ton of movies that were out during this time period that really were starting to show the true colors of the penal system. And especially earlier in the 30s, like when I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang came out, it started a lot of legislation that helped stop a lot of this slave labor type stuff. And this is just another movie to come out of that system. So yeah, if you guys haven't seen this, I highly recommend it. You could rent it like on Amazon Prime, all that kind of stuff. You could find it streaming online somewhere, just rent it and pay. It's worth the price if you're into old Hollywood and Edward G. Robinson and 30s films. But I actually got this on Warner Archive, and you can actually get it on Amazon too with the Warner Archive, or you can just order it from them directly. That's what I did. They have sales all the time, so that's why I jumped on the bandwagon. A lot of the films that I talk about in this series, which is going to be going on for a few weeks, really until I feel like stopping it, are from the Warner Archive collection. So be sure to check it out. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.